In a world where Nintendo can't stop making models of the same old system, one man will crawl over the heaps of Nintendo handhelds to find the one ultimate model for the 3DS. In this third and final installment of the 3DS hardware retrospective, it is now time to do the hard work. In the previous installments, which I recommend you take a few moments to watch if you haven't yet, we've taken a look at all the selling points and hands-on assessments for each and every 3DS model out there. With all that out of the way, we have one final task before us: to find the ultimate 3DS. We must begin at the bottom, unfortunately. The 2DS was the third model released in the 3DS family of systems, and it is by far the strangest model of DS Nintendo ever designed. You're missing the clamshell aspect, which allows these systems to close and thus keep the screens protected. But it's not all that bad. The start and select buttons reside over on the right side, a far more ergonomic improvement over other models. We find that the home button is nicely oversized by itself below the touchscreen. It's nice that the L and R buttons are large and comfy, with a contoured shape that hugs your fingers as you grip the handheld. And the stylus location on the right side is the best place for it, as most people are right-handed, and takes the least amount of effort to get to. Unfortunately, we have a ton of negatives that has landed the 2DS at the very bottom of the list. There is now only a single speaker. What are we, back in the Game Boy days? The upper screen is now only in 2D, which granted, I know there are a lot of 3DS owners who don't even like or use the 3D. But hear me out, the 3D screens have a higher resolution when they are set in 3D mode, 800 by 240 compared to 400 by 240 when in 2D mode. Even if you set the 3D to its lowest setting, you will benefit from having nice, crisp pixels which look much better when compared to the scanline-ridden image when in 2D mode. So the 3D screen looks better even if you have it on the lowest setting where the 3D effect is nearly unnoticeable. The circle pad has sharp edges and is not as comfortable as some of the other circle pads used in other models. Both the D-pad and face buttons are now squishy and mushy, not clicky and responsive like we like them. And the face buttons are still too close together. At least some of the other models get this part right. While I like the home button's new design, one bad thing about it is it doesn't travel down far enough, adding to the discomfort. As mentioned earlier, the system cannot close to keep the screens protected. This was designed with children in mind, by the way. With far more negatives than positives, this is the most bare-bones bargain stripped-down 3DS model around, and you'd be better off looking at any of the other models. While the original 3DS was the first model introduced in the line, it certainly wasn't the first DS system produced by Nintendo. It was actually the fifth, and it was a successor to the DS, DS Lite, DSi, and DSi XL. To be sure, Nintendo certainly improved upon the familiar form factor with the 3DS, but oddly enough, took some baffling steps back too. I love the stylus. I have no idea why Nintendo never revisited an extending stylus to give gamers a more comfortable grip while saving the most amount of space used to store the tool. This is hands down one of the best sounding 3DSs. The speakers seem to take up a lot of the upper area, so they're fairly large enough to deliver some nice highs and lows. Another feature that is exclusive to this model is the 3D LED, which lights up whenever 3D content is being shown. If you're, let's say, playing a regular DS game, the light will be off, and it's a cool feature that I can't help but miss in the later revisions. These face buttons are smooth and clicky, and they come across as not being made of plastic, which I'm sure they are, but they feel premium. And the outer top layer has this thick plastic shell around it that keeps the unit protected from damage. It's yet another neat feature dropped later by Nintendo. Charming though it may be, there are quite a few drawbacks to the OG 3DS. These shoulder buttons are tiny and will cut into your fingers with their sharp edges. While I love the stylus itself, it is located in the most pain in the neck spot around the back. Who thought this was a good design? Despite the rubber tabs placed to keep the upper screen from touching the lower part of the 3DS when it is closed, the screen can manage to get scratches from this rim going along the touchscreen. Speaking of the upper screen, it's far too small. This screen size didn't even impress when it was first released in 2011. Without enough space to rest your hands on while playing, the D-pad is uncomfortable to use, especially if you are looking forward to playing a bunch of side-scrollers. There isn't much space between the face buttons here either, making cramping a real possibility. With the power button placed so close to the start button, there's a real chance you may end up pressing it by mistake during gameplay. I unfortunately have done this myself. Speaking of which, the start, home, and select buttons all have a very small area to register your button presses and should have just been normal buttons. While I love the speakers and good features that you won't find anywhere else, this model is hard to recommend since it still has far too many drawbacks. Sometimes I wonder if the screen on the original 3DS was made small on purpose to make the screen on the 3DS XL so impressive by comparison. The 90% larger screens on this model are stunning and a must-have for playing a game like Smash Bros. Where the camera can zoom out pretty far. But that doesn't mean that this model doesn't take a step back in a hugely disappointing way. On either side of the massive upper screen, you'll notice smaller versions of the stereo speakers from the original model. Does this mean the XL model sounds worse than the other models we've looked at thus far? Yes. Yes, it does. There's still not enough space between the face buttons, I'm just saying. Now let's get into why this is the best old 3DS model. The LEDs are now visible whether the unit is open or closed. The shoulder buttons are much more comfortable to use over the originals, and larger to boot. With the stylus on the right, there's no need to strain yourself getting it out. Having rubber feet on the bottom, while not entirely necessary, it is a nice touch that will keep the scratches away. Same situation on the upper portion of the inside with some rubber feet in place of tabs that keep your precious screen much safer. Of course, both the upper 3D capable screen and lower touchscreen are much larger and warrant the larger form factor. This circle pad is, believe it or not, more contoured and comfortable than the originals. It's really only something you notice if you compare them back to back. Speaking of added comfort, the D-pad is easier to use now that you have the room for resting your hand, and the select, home, and start buttons are larger and easier to press down. Such an improvement. With far more positive than negative aspects going for it, the 3DS XL is an easy recommendation if you don't care about the added features our next three models bring to the table. While I have a lot of love and appreciation for the old line of 3DS systems, not a single one of them can hold a candle to any of the systems in the new line, and they take up the top 3 spots for good reason. When this line was first introduced, they fairly warranted praise from the entire gaming community. Some went as far as to say that these are what the 3DS system should have been from the very beginning. But we must start with the worst of the best, the new 2DS XL. Not sure why the sound is always something which takes a hit on the 2DS models, but despite having stereo speakers in this model, they lack clarity. Which is not helped by their placement on the front, and due to their location, the vibration from louder play sessions travels straight through your hands. Look at this thing. It's the worst stylus of the bunch, easily. You'd be better off using your finger. There is, of course, no 3D on the upper screen, which means you'll be stuck with a lower resolution no matter what. The other new 3DS models got a neat auto brightness feature that is lacking here, unfortunately. And the build feels fairly cheap with its smooth finish on the bottom and super thin upper portion. The design choices here were interesting, to say the least. But worst of the best is still pretty good. With the improved internal specifications, it probably comes as no surprise that the more capable models have access to games that will not work on the older models, despite it being a fairly small number of titles. There are performance differences in games which will run on the older models, such as faster loading times in Smash, and major differences in Hyrule Warriors Legends, with older 3DS systems only managing to run in 2D mode, and a slower frame rate. Amiibo now work without the need for an additional NFC reader, which seemed like a no-brainer improvement once Amiibo arrived on the scene. 2 extra shoulder buttons in the form of ZL and ZR, as well as the C-stick, which is admittedly easiest to use on this model since the hinge is more out of the way. Another best of feature in the new line of systems is the micro SD location. Located right next to the game card slot, it's really great if you need to swap out your SD card often. Both the game card slot and the SD card slot get this neat little cover that is unique to the new 2DS XL. And amazing! The shoulder buttons have a better design than the other two models, an improvement which was long overdue by its release in 2017. There's no need to worry about your screen getting scruffed up when you close it, since the updated design keeps your upper screen safe and sound. And speaking of screens, these are XL size for both the upper and lower screens. I have a fondness for the home button being over here on the left, probably because it makes the touchscreen seem larger and adding some nice symmetry to the start and select buttons. If you are one of the many 3DS fans who doesn't care much for the 3D, even after my stellar defense of the effect, this just may be the best choice for you. Let's face it, you could do far worse. Now, I am fully aware that once I reveal my number 2 pick, you're gonna know what my choice is for number 1. Being down to the new 3DS and new 3DS XL, a lot of the difference will admittedly come down to preference. So on to my number 2 pick. There's not much bad to say about this one. These L and R buttons are too small, and the ZL and ZR buttons are too far away to get to comfortably. By far the worst complaint, the micro SD card location is imprisoned behind the battery cover that is secured by screws. This annoying rim around the touchscreen once again manages to scratch your upper screen, since the rubber feet just aren't prominent enough to cushion it effectively. And since we are dealing with a smaller form factor, having cramped space for the D-pad comes with it by default. Due to this being the 4th 3DS model designed, the improvements over the old line are a mixture of both obvious and unexpected changes. The standout feature is the Super Stable 3D, which eliminates the sweet spot you had to hold the original 3DS and XL models at for the 3D to work. Just like the new 2DS XL, you get the larger library of games, like Super Nintendo Virtual Console titles, improved performance, built-in amiibo reader, and added control inputs. What's unique to the small new 3DS are the faceplates. You can get new ones to swap out, sorry, I don't have any additional ones to show you, and really get into customizing it. The power button is in a new location on the new line of systems, and it's better for it. Those same rubber feet from the 3DS XL make a return on the bottom to again save you some unwanted scratches. This upper screen, even though it's not XL sized, is larger than the one found on the original 3DS and 2DS. It is accompanied by good speakers that are about the same as the ones found on the original 3DS. Remember how there's a good circle pad and a bad circle pad? Well, you get the good one here. We get some nice space in between the face buttons, for your comfort of course. And the start and select buttons are over on the right, which is the best place they can be. Lots of 3DS fans prefer this model the most, and I can definitely see why. You don't miss out on any features, and those faceplates must be fun to collect and use. That only leaves one model left. It's been a long road, and I believe that each model has its own perks. But if I was forced to pick only one 3DS, it would have to be the new 3DS XL. When it comes to negative aspects, the new 3DS XL shares many of the same downsides as the standard size. L and R buttons are still too small, the ZL and ZR buttons are still hard to reach, and the micro SD is still under lock and key. But it doesn't have the cramped spacing for the D-pad since it is an XL-sized model. By that same token, many of the positives are also shared. Super Stable 3D, full library of games, improved performance, built-in amiibo reader, added control inputs, good power button placement, rubber feet, screen doesn't scratch when closed, good circle pad, comfy space buttons, and start and select make sense where they are. But the screens are the largest and the speakers are the best quality, being the loudest and the clearest of any 3DS model, period. Look, when it comes to video games, the visual and audio experience is paramount. Hopefully I've explained the difference between the 2D and 3D screens well enough, and while I can appreciate the compact design of the smaller new 3DS, the larger form factor provides more comfort over and above those larger screens. and this really does sound outstanding. Well, we've done it. We've gone through each aspect of every 3DS model out there, whether it's something you'll see on a spec sheet or something you really only comprehend by getting hands-on experience with the device. Ranking them can be fun, really breaking down the differences between each model, but that honestly really wasn't my goal. I hope that after watching this short series, you've come away with a new appreciation for an incredible Nintendo handheld. And if you're interested in getting one but don't have one yet, I hope I've given you enough information to decide which one is the best for you. This has been the 3DS Hardware Retrospective by Level 1 Sword, and I'll see you later. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to keep on top of the videos, definitely take a sec to subscribe. I'm also on Twitter, Instagram, and Patreon if you want to follow me across the internet. Level 1 Sword also has a weekly podcast, so give it a listen.